Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Spline Starter Series. In this tutorial, we're going to dive into the Spline interface and learn how to navigate the scene. Let's get started. Before we jump into the details, I want to mention that we won't cover every button in Spline. It's not practical to explain everything in one series. Instead, we'll briefly explain the features, and in future lessons, we'll explore each of them more deeply. So, when you log into your account, you'll see a screen like this. On the left-hand side, you'll find several options. For example, in the library, you can access a collection of cool 3D objects made by Spline, which you can use in your projects. You can also explore the Community tab to see and use other people's work or publish your own. But since we're new to Spline, let's start by creating our first project. You can do this by clicking the plus button at the top of the screen or the blue button on the right. After a few seconds, you'll see the interface. The first thing you'll see is a window asking you to choose from a few ready-made templates, but we'll click on the blank space to close this and start fresh. Now let's talk about how to navigate the scene. To orbit, hold the Alt or Option key on Mac and click the left mouse button. To pan, use the middle mouse button or hold the spacebar and left click. Zooming in and out is easy with the scroll wheel. You can also navigate using the axis icon at the bottom of the screen. For example, clicking the green dot takes you to the top view, the red dot to the right view, and the blue dot to the front view. There's also an isometric view button and a reset button to go back to the starting point. At the bottom of the axis view, you have options for orthographic and perspective views. Orthographic view displays parallel lines, while perspective view gives a more realistic 3D look. At the top of the screen is the toolbar. Here you can create various shapes, text, particles, and primitive shapes like cubes, spheres, and cylinders. You can also add cameras, lights, and groups. Right next to the plus button, you'll find the most commonly used tools. Right now, we have a rectangle and a light in the scene. Let's delete them and create a cube and light ourselves. To create a cube, you can either click on it in the toolbar and then either click in the scene or click and drag to adjust its size. Holding the Shift key creates a proportional shape, and the Alt-Option key centers it on your mouse pointer. To create a light, you should click on the plus button, and at the end of the list, you can find a few different types of light. We choose a point light. As you can see in the scene, we have a new light and we can move it around. Let's explore the rest of the toolbar. In the middle of the toolbar, you have the Selection tool. This allows you to select and transform objects. Click an object to move it along the respective axis, rotate it by clicking on the arcs, or scale it by clicking the dots. The gray circles allow you to move objects in two axes simultaneously. Next to the Selection tool is the Comment tool. This is useful for leaving notes for yourself or your team. Further along, you'll find the Frame tool, where you can modify your screen size. You can change the view frame to suit different screens, but for now, we're using the responsive mode. At the right end of the toolbar, there's a zoom percentage indicator, which you can adjust to zoom in or out. There's also an export button for when you're ready to share your scene. We'll cover this in detail in a future episode. The last icon on the toolbar is the play button. You can preview your scene here. This is crucial to test your interactions and see how they respond. On the left-hand side, we have the Object Manager. Here, you can perform several tasks like deleting objects, renaming them, hiding them by clicking the I button, or locking them to prevent selection in your scene. At the bottom of this tab, you'll find the Spline library, where you can choose from various objects created by Spline. On the right tab, we have the Asset panel. This panel lets you manage all your assets like materials, images, and media. Currently, we don't have any images or media, but adding them is straightforward. Simply click the plus button to import your objects or textures. We'll cover this in more detail later in the series. Now let's move on to the Properties panel on the right. We have two types of Properties panels. The first is the Scene panel, which appears when no objects are selected. Simply click on the blank canvas to access it. The second panel is specific to each object. Click on any object like a rectangle or camera to view its unique properties. Starting with the scene properties, At the top, we have the viewport. Here, you can select the camera view. Currently, we're using the default personal camera, but you can easily create a new one by clicking Add New Camera or using the plus button in the toolbar. Once your camera is created, you can move it around with the Move tool, and a preview will appear at the bottom left of the screen. You can easily switch between cameras and use familiar navigation controls to move, orbit, and zoom. Next, we have the frame section. This is similar to what we discussed in the toolbar menu, where you can choose different screen sizes. Moving on to the scene background color, you can select any color and adjust its opacity. Then we have the play camera, which determines the camera used in play mode. Click the triangle button on the toolbar menu to enter play mode, and the selected play camera will be used. In the light section, you have ambient light, which lights your scene uniformly. You can toggle it on or off, change its color, intensity, and shadow quality. Higher quality shadows look better but take more time to render, while lower quality shadows are faster to calculate. Next is the simulation section, where you can enable physics for objects to react to gravity and collisions. After that, we have the effects section, which allows you to access post-processing options. These effects are off by default, but you can toggle them on and customize their settings. We'll talk about some of these effects in our lighting and post-processing lesson. The fog section lets you add depth to your scene. You can use the background color or choose a different color for the fog and adjust its depth using the near and far sliders. Ambient shadows create shadows where objects touch each other, like where an object touches a surface. To demonstrate, let's create a plane under the cube. As you can see, we have the ambient shadow where the two objects collide. You can tweak the settings for these shadows, including their color and quality. In the global settings, you can turn off the grid or change its position and enable snapping to align objects more precisely. With snapping on, objects will lock to the grid edges, making precise movements easier. The variables section allows you to create reusable values in the scene. This is a more advanced topic that we'll cover in future tutorials. Finally, we have the scene assets, which are similar to what we discussed in the Assets tab on the left panel. Next, let's dive into object properties. Some settings are similar for all objects, like changing position, scale, and rotation. However, each object has its unique settings as well. For instance, selecting a camera lets you change its type or zoom level. Similarly, a box has different options, like adjusting its size. Now, let's quickly explore object properties. At the top, you have states and events, where you can create interactions. We'll cover this topic in more detail in a future lesson. Next, we have position, scale, and rotation. Then there's the snap setting, which is similar to the scene properties snapping setting. In the shape section, you can adjust the box size, add edges, and change the corner radius. If you click Smooth and Edit, you'll be taken to the Editing tool panel, which we'll discuss more in the next session. In the Materials section, you can create specific materials for each object. The workflow is somewhat similar to Photoshop. You can add layers, change blending modes, adjust opacity, and choose from different layer types. We'll discuss this further in future lessons. Next, we have Align to Path. You can use it to align your object to a path and move it along it. The visibility settings let you control how your object should be shown in the scene. You can also manage shadows, deciding if your object will cast or receive them here. The Cloner section, as the name suggests, lets you clone your object. While we won't cover this in detail now, we'll definitely explore it in future lessons since it's a useful feature. Finally, we have collision settings, where you can enable or disable collisions for your objects. This has been a basic overview of the Spline interface. In the next session, we'll start modeling the keyboard. As we progress, you'll become more familiar with how everything works. Thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you like our content. See you in the next episode.